The town square was thick with dust, heat, and judgment. A wooden scaffold rose like a skeleton in the center, its beam already fitted with a coarse rope that swayed lazily in the wind. The settlers had gathered farmers, shopkeepers, wives with children clinging to their skirts, all murmuring with the grim eagerness of people hungry for a spectacle. Justice, they called it. But for the man bound at the wrists beneath the scaffold, it was nothing but the end of his world. His name was Daniel Rourke, a young ranch hand who had drifted west seeking honest work. He had no family here, no allies to vouch for his character, only a few coins in his pocket and the sweat of his labor to prove his worth. Yet here he stood, branded a thief and a murderer, condemned for stealing Apache horses and killing a tribesman during the raid. The trial had been swift, a mockery more than anything. The evidence was circumstantial tracks in the sand, a bloodied knife left near the horse's corral, but the sheriff had pressed the case hard. The townsfolk, already on edge after months of rising tension with the Apache, were eager to see someone pay. And Daniel, a stranger with no roots, had been the perfect scapegoat. As the judge declared the sentence, Daniel's throat went dry. By law and by witness, you are guilty. You shall hang by the neck until dead. The words rang out final, sealing his fate. He tried to speak, to protest, but his voice cracked against the tide of jeers. "I didn't do it," he shouted, struggling against the deputy's grip. "I've never stolen a thing in my life, and I've no quarrel with the Apache." But his pleas fell on deaf ears. A woman spat in the dust, muttering about horse thieves. A boy climbed onto a wagon to get a better view, his eyes wide with excitement. To them, Daniel was already as good as dead. The deputy marched him up the steps of the gallows. The noose loomed above, rough hemp that smelled of tar and smoke. Daniel's knees weakened as he stared at it. He had always imagined his life would end in some ordinary way: old age, a fever, maybe a ranch accident. Never this. Never by rope, swinging like an animal for a crime he didn't commit. The hangman stood ready, adjusting the knot with practiced hands. The sheriff looked on from below, arms crossed, his eyes hard and unyielding. The crowd grew restless, calling for the rope to be tightened, for the law to be served. Daniel's heart pounded against his ribs, each beat like a hammer. He thought of the wide plains he had ridden across, the nights under the stars when he believed freedom stretched endlessly before him. That dream now narrowed to a single beam of wood and a coil of rope. As the noose slipped over his head, the weight of it settled heavy on his shoulders. Sweat stung his eyes, blurring the faces below. For a moment, silence fell, thick and expectant. The sun beat down on his neck, the taste of dust on his tongue. Daniel closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, not for mercy, for he had little hope of that, but for truth, that somehow someone might see it before the rope tightened. Yet in his gut, despair gnawed. No one cared for the truth. The rope awaited him, and it seemed no hand would stop it. Just as the hangman reached for the lever, a ripple moved through the crowd. Heads turned. From the edge of the square, a figure appeared, mounted on a dark horse, his presence commanding, his face painted in stark streaks of red and black. An Apache warrior. The murmurs rose to a hush as the rider advanced, every eye fixed on him. The warrior's gaze locked on Daniel, sharp as a blade. And though Daniel did not yet understand, his fate was about to shift. The rope was waiting, but so was an oath that would change everything. The silence that fell over the square was strange and heavy. The murmuring crowd, moments before hungry for the sight of a hanging, now stood frozen, their eyes locked on the lone rider who had halted the proceedings. The Apache warrior guided his dark horse forward with slow, deliberate steps. He sat tall in the saddle, shoulders broad, his presence commanding enough to part the crowd without a word. His skin bore the sun's burnished hue, his face painted in striking lines of red and black across cheek and brow. An eagle feather hung from his braided hair, swaying with each movement. He carried no rifle, only a bow strapped across his back and a knife at his side. Yet the weight of his confidence made him more dangerous than any gunman. Daniel, standing beneath the noose, blinked in disbelief. He had heard stories of Apache raids, tales spun in saloons and around campfires of merciless warriors who struck like shadows. Yet the man before him did not look like a raider. He looked like judgment itself, calm and unshaken, as though this gallows and its crowd belonged to him. The sheriff stepped forward, his hand hovering near the revolver at his hip. His jaw tightened as he raised his voice. "You've no business here, Apache. This man has been tried by our law. You'll not interfere." The warrior's gaze swept across the sheriff, then the crowd, then finally fixed on Daniel. His voice, when he spoke, was low yet carried easily. Each word weighted with authority. "The rope is not his justice," he said, his English clear though accented. "Your law is blind." "He is not guilty." A wave of protest rippled through the crowd. A shopkeeper shouted, "He stole your horses." A farmer's wife cried out, "He killed your brother." But the warrior silenced them with a single glance, his dark eyes steady and unyielding. Daniel's throat constricted. For weeks, he had begged anyone to believe him, but no one had listened. Now this man, a stranger, an enemy in the eyes of the town, stood as the first to cast doubt on his guilt. The sheriff's hand finally closed on his revolver. "You'll ride out now," he barked. "Or we'll see to it the rope stretches for two." The warrior did not flinch. He dismounted slowly, the dust stirring around his boots, and stepped closer to the gallows. His movements were measured, calm, yet carried a subtle threat, as if he had already weighed every man present, and found them lacking. He stopped at the foot of the scaffold and spoke again, this time directly to Daniel. "You are not the thief," he said, his voice like stone against the silence. "But your life is not free. The rope awaits you unless you swear an oath to me." The crowd gasped, stunned into stillness. Daniel's heart lurched. His mind scrambled to understand the offer. An oath? To this warrior? What did it mean, servitude, allegiance, something worse? The Apache warrior continued, his tone unwavering. "Swear your word, bind your life to mine. I will cut the rope, and none here will touch you while I stand." Daniel's mouth went dry. Behind him, the hangman's hand twitched near the lever. The rope itched against his skin. He could almost feel the drop, the snap, the darkness closing in. His choices narrowed to a single line: die here, or live bound to this man's command. The sheriff spat into the dust, fury flashing in his eyes. "Don't listen to him, boy. He'll use you, then kill you. Better the rope than his leash?" Daniel's chest heaved, torn between pride and the primal urge to survive. He met the warrior's gaze unblinking, relentless, but not cruel. There was something in it, some fierce certainty that spoke louder than the jeers of the crowd. At last nodded, his voice hoarse but steady. "I swear." The Apache warrior drew his knife in a single, swift motion. The crowd recoiled, some screaming, some cursing. But he did not strike Daniel. With a single slash, he cut the rope from around Daniel's neck. The coarse hemp fell loose at his feet. Gasps and shouts filled the square. The condemned man was free, yet bound now by something far stronger than rope, his word, and in that moment, Daniel knew his life no longer belonged to himself. The square was chaos. Women screamed, men cursed, and children cried as the Apache warrior's knife severed the rope. The coarse hemp hit the dust like a dead snake, and Daniel staggered forward, clutching his raw neck, the breath of life burning in his lungs. For the first time since his arrest, he was not staring death in the face, but freedom was not what it seemed. The sheriff's voice split the uproar. "Seize them both," he roared, his revolver already clearing its holster. Deputies pushed through the crowd, hands on weapons, eager to obey, but the warrior was ready. He grabbed Daniel's arm in a grip like iron, pulling him down from the scaffold. With a quick, commanding glance, he swept his gaze across the townsfolk. "Touch him," he warned, voice low and sharp, "and you'll answer to me." The sheer certainty in his tone froze them in place. For a moment, no one dared move. Daniel stumbled beside him, still dazed, his heart pounding with the aftershock of almost dying. His mind whirled. What oath had he just sworn? What did this man intend for him? The Apache warrior led him a few steps aside, out of reach of the deputies, before releasing his grip. He turned, facing Daniel directly, and for the first time, his expression softened not with kindness, but with the gravity of a man sealing a pact. You live because you gave me your word, he said. Now you must understand what that means. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat still raw. You've saved me from the gallows. I'll not forget that. But what is it you want from me? The warrior's gaze bored into him, steady and unblinking. An oath is more than gratitude. Your life is tied to mine now. You will ride where I ride, fight where I fight. You will not raise hand against me or my people. If you break your word, the rope will seem kinder than what waits. The words struck Daniel like hammer blows. His heart clenched, and for a moment he wondered if he had merely traded one noose for another. To swear loyalty to an Apache warrior, an enemy of the town, of the law, what future could that bring? I never asked to be part of your war, Daniel said hoarsely. I'm no soldier. I'm no traitor. I'm just a man trying to survive. The warrior tilted his head, his expression unreadable. And yet you live when others wanted you dead? Survival is no small gift. You owe me more than your life. You owe me your word. A man's word is the root of his honor. Break it, and you are nothing. Daniel's chest tightened. He thought of the judge's cold decree, the sheriff's accusing eyes, the jeering crowd who would have cheered his death. None of them had cared for truth. Only this warrior, this stranger, had stepped between him and the rope. If honor meant anything, Daniel owed it here. Finally, he nodded, his voice rough but steady. Then I'll keep my word. I'll ride with you for as long as it takes. You have my oath. The warrior studied him for a long, tense moment. Then, with a slow nod, he extended his hand. Daniel hesitated, then clasped it, their grips firm. The pact was sealed dot around them. The townsfolk stirred, murmuring angrily, yet none dared rush forward. The sheriff spat into the dirt, fury smoldering in his eyes. You've damned yourself, boy, he growled. Better the rope than his leash. You'll find out soon enough, but Daniel barely heard him. The Apache warrior's hand released his, and the weight of the oath settled heavy on his shoulders. He was alive, but his life was no longer his own. The square erupted the moment Daniel clasped the warrior's hand. The oath might have bound them, but to the townsfolk it was an outrage, a betrayal in plain sight. He's with them now. Someone shouted. String 'em both up. Cried another. The sheriff barked orders, his revolver gleaming in the sun. Deputies surged forward, boots pounding the dust, hands tightening around rifle stocks. The Apache warrior didn't hesitate. With a single whistle sharp as a hawk's cry, his horse surged forward. In one motion, he seized Daniel's arm and hauled him onto the saddle behind him. Daniel barely had time to grab the warrior's waist before the horse lunged into a gallop. Gunfire cracked. Bullets whined past their ears, splintering the gallows wood as the crowd scattered in panic. The warrior leaned low over the horse's neck, his movements practiced, every ounce of his body in tune with the animal beneath him. Daniel clung on desperately, his raw throat rasping with every gasp of air. Hold tight, the warrior snapped, voice steady despite the chaos. They tore through the outskirts of town, past startled cattle and broken fences. Daniel risked a glance back. The sheriff and 3 deputies were already mounting up, rifles in hand, spurring their horses in hot pursuit. Dust rose like a storm behind them. The land beyond the town stretched wide in harsh scrub brush, jagged rocks, dry gullies carved into the earth. The warrior guided his horse with precision, weaving through narrow passes that forced their pursuers to slow. Daniel felt every jolt of the saddle, every sting of wind against his face, and the sickening thought gnawed at him. Had he traded the rope for a bullet? You planned this, Daniel shouted over the thundering hooves. You knew they'd chase us. The warrior's reply was curt, unbothered. Of course. Men fear the law less than they fear shame. They will not let you go so easily. As they crested a ridge, gunfire rang out again. A bullet clipped a rock near Daniel's leg, spraying shards of stone. He flinched, his grip tightening. We won't outrun them. The warrior gave a grim smile. Not outrun, outlast. He pulled the reins sharply, guiding the horse down into a dry creek bed. The terrain shifted loose stones and winding paths that only an experienced tracker could navigate. Daniel realized then this was no blind flight. The warrior knew the land as a hawk knows the wind. Every turn, every dip in the earth was chosen with purpose. The deputies shouted in frustration behind them, their horses stumbling on unstable ground. One fell back, cursing as his mount nearly toppled. "See?" the warrior said, his tone calm, almost instructive. "The land is a lie to those who respect it. To those who do not, it is death." Daniel clung tighter, his fear mixing with awe. In town he had been powerless, bound, silenced, mocked. Here in the wild, every instinct screamed that the rules had changed. Survival belonged to those who could master it. Night fell as they pressed deeper into the wilderness. The sky turned indigo, stars pricking through the dark. The sheriff's posse lingered on their trail, their lanterns bobbing faintly in the distance, but the gap had widened at last. The warrior slowed his horse near a rocky outcrop that shielded them from view. Both men dismounted, the animal's sides heaving with exhaustion. Daniel's legs trembled as they hit the ground, his body sore from the ride, his throat still raw from the noose. He staggered against a boulder, catching his breath. "Why?" he rasped. "Why go through all this? Why save me at all?" The warrior crouched, scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. His expression was unreadable in the dim firelight of the stars. "Because your life is a key," he said quietly. "A key to justice. And because you gave me your word. From now until it is broken. Your fate and mine are one." Daniel felt the weight of those words press down on him heavier than the rope had. The gallows might have ended him in an instant. This oath, this bond, promised a far longer and far more dangerous road. And as the distant echo of the posse's shouts carried faintly across the desert, Daniel realized there was no turning back. By dawn, the desert stretched endless before them, an ocean of dust and jagged stone painted gold by the rising sun. Daniel's body ached from the hard ride, his lips cracked with thirst, his mind weighed down by the oath he had given in desperation. Every step away from town felt like a step deeper into exile. The Apache warrior moved with calm purpose, his every motion deliberate. He built a small fire shielded by rocks, his hands sure as he coaxed flame from flint. He shared a strip of dried meat, tossing one to Daniel without ceremony. Daniel caught it clumsily, staring at the leathery flesh. Hunger gnawed at him, but so did pride. "So this is it?" he muttered, his voice still hoarse from the rope. "Trade a noose for scraps?" The warrior glanced up, expression unreadable. "Food is food. You wish for a feast? Go back to your gallows." The bluntness stung, but it was true. Daniel chewed slowly, his stomach grateful even if his pride wasn't. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the distant cry of a hawk. At length, Daniel spoke again, bitterness edging his words. "You've bound me to you, but you've yet to say why. If I'm just your servant, tell me now." The warrior met his gaze, calm and steady. "Not servant, oath brother. A man with no ties is easy to break. Now you have one. Your word. It holds you," Daniel scoffed. "And what if I walk away the first chance I get?" The warrior's eyes narrowed, though his tone never rose. "Then you die. By my hand or by theirs?" He jerked his chin toward the horizon where the faint dust of the posse still lingered. The words chilled Daniel more than the desert night had. He realized then the truth. His survival was tethered not only to the warrior's skill, but to his trust. Alone, he wouldn't last a week. With the posse hunting him and the wilderness waiting to swallow him, he needed the warrior as much as he resented him that day. Necessity began to carve away pride. The warrior led Daniel through rough terrain, teaching him how to read signs in the earth, a broken twig, a faint footprint, the way dust settled after wind. When Daniel stumbled, the warrior corrected him with sharp, simple words. "Step lighter. Eyes up. Hear before you are heard." At first, Daniel bristled. "I've lived on land all my life," he grumbled. "Don't talk to me like I'm a child." The warrior only gave him a long, quiet look. "Then prove you are not." So Daniel tried. He learned to walk without scattering stones, to spot the shimmer of water hidden in a dry gulch, to feel when eyes might be watching from the ridges. Slowly, grudgingly, respect replaced resentment. By evening, they reached a sheltered canyon where the air held the coolness of water. The warrior knelt, brushing aside reeds to reveal a hidden spring. Daniel dropped to his knees, cupping the cold water in trembling hands. It tasted sweeter than anything he had ever known. He looked up, droplets running down his chin. "If you hadn't brought me here, I'd have died by nightfall." The warrior did not smile, but his eyes softened slightly. "That is why I said, your life is mine now. As long as your word holds, I will keep it safe." Daniel sat back, the truth settling into him like the weight of stone. He was bound not by rope, not by law, but by something both stronger and stranger, an oath he could neither escape nor deny. And though part of him still yearned for freedom, another part knew survival demanded trust. As night fell and stars blanketed the canyon sky, Daniel realized this uneasy bond, this necessity, was becoming something more. It was not friendship, not yet, but it was the beginning of understanding. And perhaps, just perhaps, it was the beginning of something that might save them both. The night wind carried more than the scent of mesquite. It carried danger. The Apache warrior, crouched low at the canyon's edge, pressed his ear to the ground. When he lifted his head, his expression told Daniel all he needed to know. "They are coming," he said simply. Daniel's gut tightened. The posse. Men from town who'd once raised a glass with him, now hunting him like an animal. He could almost hear the jangle of their bridles. The low growl of voices carried on the wind. "Then let's run," Daniel urged, his voice harsh with fear. The warrior shook his head. "No running. Running leaves tracks. We fight by shadows, not by speed." Daniel swallowed, panic gnawing at the edge of reason. "Fight? There's a dozen men armed, ready. You and me against all of them? That's suicide." The warrior's gaze was like flint striking steel. "No, it is survival. If you learned anything yesterday, it must be today." There was no more argument. The Apache began to move, quickly, silently, preparing the land around them. He showed Daniel how to scatter loose stones across a path to rattle beneath boots. He taught him to twist reeds and set them near the spring, so the faintest movement would send ripples across the water. Every sign, every shadow, every trick of the earth became part of their defense. Daniel's hands shook as he tried to copy him. The warrior caught his wrist and stilled him. "Fear will kill you faster than a bullet," he murmured. "Breathe." So Daniel forced air into his lungs, steadying himself, trying to quiet the pounding of his heart. By midnight, the posse's lanterns flickered on the ridges, weaving like restless stars. Daniel crouched in the brush, gripping the knife the warrior had pressed into his palm earlier. His throat was dry again, though water was close by. The thought of killing or being killed made his stomach churn. The posse descended into the canyon, their leader's voice carrying loud and confident. "He's down here. We'll smoke him out by dawn." Daniel's fear threatened to rise again, but then the warrior's hand touched his shoulder, firm and steady. A silent reminder. He wasn't alone. The first trap snapped. Stones cascaded down a slope, startling a horse into rearing. Men shouted, curses filled the air. Before confusion settled, the warrior loosed an arrow from the shadows, striking a lantern from a rider's hand. It shattered, plunging part of the canyon into darkness. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. This wasn't a battle, it was a storm of shadows, noise, and fear. And now he was part of it. When one of the posse broke off, stumbling toward the spring, Daniel froze. The man was too close. His knife felt heavy in his hand. He didn't want to use it, didn't want blood on his hands, but then the posse member lifted his rifle, scanning the reeds where Daniel crouched. One shot, and it would be over. Something inside Daniel shifted. This was the trial the warrior had warned him of, not just survival, but choice. He moved silently, stepping behind the man the way the Apache had taught him. With a desperate burst of courage, he slammed the hilt of his knife against the man's skull. The figure crumpled silently into the reeds. Daniel stood there, trembling, staring at what he had done. He hadn't killed, but he had acted. He had protected his own life. From across the canyon, the warrior's eyes met his, glinting with approval. No words passed, but the meaning was clear. The oath was holding. Daniel had proven it. The battle raged until dawn, the posse finally retreating, broken and humiliated. They had lost their element of certainty, unnerved by shadows that struck and vanished, by enemies they could not pin down. As the first light touched the canyon, Daniel sat with his back against a stone, chest heaving, sweat mingling with dust. His hands still shook, but they no longer felt empty. He had faced fire and survived. The Apache warrior came to stand beside him, arms folded. "You did not run," he said. "Now you begin to understand." Daniel nodded slowly, staring at the fading dust trail of the retreating posse. "Yeah," he whispered. "I think I do." For the first time, the bond between them was no longer just necessity. It was choice. The canyon lay quiet after the chaos of the night. Smoke from the broken lanterns clung faintly to the air, the scent of scorched oil mingling with dust. The posse was gone for now, but Daniel knew they'd be back, angrier, more determined. He sat slumped near the spring, arms draped across his knees, exhaustion weighing heavy. His body was sore, but it wasn't the aches that kept him awake. It was the memory of the man he struck down. He could still feel the jolt of impact, still see the way the body had crumpled. He hadn't killed him, but the choice to act lingered like a brand. The Apache warrior sat across the fire, calm and unshaken, sharpening his blade with slow, steady strokes. The rhythm of stone against steel was strangely soothing. Daniel found himself watching him, studying the way his hands moved, hands that had fought, hunted, survived. Hands that had saved his life. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "You never told me your name?" The warrior paused, eyes lifting to meet his. For a long moment he said nothing, as though weighing whether the truth was worth giving. Then with quiet dignity he answered, "Chayton." The name rolled like thunder in Daniel's ears. At last, the faceless figure who had saved him from the noose was a man, real, tangible, human. "Chayton?" Daniel repeated, testing it, grounding himself with it. "And you," Chayton said, tilting his head. "Your name?" "Daniel," he replied, almost sheepishly. Then he added with a bitter laugh, "Though lately in town they call me worse." Chayton studied him, silent again. Then he spoke, his voice like low wind through the canyon. "Why do they hunt you, Daniel? You wear no outlaw's eyes, but their rope was ready?" Daniel swallowed hard. He had hidden the truth even from himself, but the weight of it pressed down too heavily to deny. "I was framed," he said at last. "Bank robbery. 3 men dead. Money gone? They said I pulled the trigger. I didn't, I swear it." His hands curled into fists. "The real culprit vanished, but I was easy to blame." Chayton's gaze lingered, deep and measuring. "Your word," he murmured, "already binds you to me. If it is false, it will burn us both." Daniel met his eyes, unflinching. "Then may it burn, because it's the truth." A long silence followed, broken only by the crackle of the small fire. Finally, Chayton gave the faintest nod, as though accepting Daniel's vow as real. Now it was Daniel's turn to ask, "And you? Why save me? You could have left me hanging, spared yourself the trouble. Yet you didn't." Chayton's knife paused mid-stroke. His jaw tightened. "Because once," he said slowly, "a man gave me his word, and broke it. My brother paid with his life." His eyes darkened like storm clouds. "I swore never again to trust a word unless I held it tight in my own hands. You gave me yours. Now you will keep it or die keeping it." The fire popped, sending sparks into the night air. For the first time, Daniel saw beneath Chayton's mask of stone. He saw the wound hidden there, raw and old, carved by betrayal. It wasn't just duty that bound Chayton to him, it was vengeance against the kind of broken promises that had destroyed him once before. Daniel nodded slowly, understanding. "Then maybe," he said quietly, "we're both running from lies that weren't ours to carry." The canyon seemed to exhale around them. The silence was no longer heavy but shared, a bridge instead of a barrier. That night, as the stars burned overhead, Daniel felt the first stirrings of something deeper than survival, trust, fragile, tentative, but real. The rope that had once been meant to hang him had instead woven a bond between them, one stitched with truth, pain, and the promise of something stronger than fear. For the first time, Daniel dared to believe. Perhaps this oath wasn't just a chain. Perhaps it was a chance. The sun rose red over the canyon, its light painting the rocks in hues of fire. Daniel stirred awake to the sound of horses in the distance, too many to be a hunting party, too determined to be travelers. The posse had returned, and this time they weren't leaving without blood. Chayton already stood at the canyon's edge, bow in hand, eyes sharp as an eagle's. "They come," he said, voice steady, as though he had expected it all along. Daniel forced himself to his feet, legs aching, heart hammering. He knew this moment was different from the skirmish the night before. This wasn't about shadows or delaying them. This was about survival. The posse wouldn't scatter again. They'd fight until either he was in chains or dead. Chayton turned to him, calm but unyielding. "Today you prove your word in blood." Daniel's mouth went dry. He wanted to protest, to deny the warrior's demand, but the truth settled heavy in his chest. He had sworn an oath, and now, in this crucible, it would be tested. The posse descended with rifles raised. Their leader, a broad man with a scar across his jaw, called out with a sneer, "Daniel Holt? Your time's up. Come quietly and maybe the rope will be quick." Daniel felt the weight of his choice pressing down. He could step out now, surrender, and end it all, his oath to Chayton broken, his life forfeit. Or he could stand beside the warrior who had saved him, and face death on his own terms. He gripped the rifle Chayton had pressed into his hands. "No rope," he muttered. "Not today." The battle erupted like thunder. Gunfire cracked through the canyon, bullets sparking against stone. Chayton moved like a shadow, arrows flying swift and sure, each one finding its mark. Daniel crouched behind a boulder, firing in bursts. His aim clumsy but fueled by desperation. One rider broke through, charging straight for Daniel with pistol raised. Instinct overrode fear. Daniel fired, the shot slamming the man from his saddle. He froze, staring at what he'd done. His first kill. His hands trembled, but when he looked up, Chayton's eyes met his. No judgment, no mockery, only grim approval. The fight raged on. Smoke and dust choked the air, shouts echoing off the canyon walls. A bullet grazed Daniel's arm, searing fire across his flesh. He stumbled, nearly falling, until Chayton was there, pulling him back, covering him with shield-like presence. "You hold!" Chayton barked, forcing Daniel upright. "Your word keeps you alive." Those words lit something fierce inside him. He gritted his teeth, raised his rifle again, and stood shoulder to shoulder with the warrior. Together they turned the tide. Chayton with his deadly precision, Daniel with the stubborn resolve of a man who refused to hang. By the time the sun burned high, the canyon was silent again. The survivors of the posse had fled, leaving only dust and echoes behind. Bodies lay scattered across the rocks, grim proof of the battle's cost. Daniel staggered, blood dripping from his wound, chest heaving with exhaustion. Chayton approached him, eyes dark and unreadable. For a long moment they simply stared at each other. Then Chayton drew a knife and held it out. Daniel tensed. "What's this?" Chayton sliced his own palm, the blood welling red against bronze skin. "An oath sealed in words can be broken, but blood binds forever." Daniel hesitated. The memory of betrayal, of false accusations, still weighed heavy. But here, in this canyon, standing beside the man who had saved him from rope and bullet alike, Daniel knew the truth. His survival was no longer just about escape. It was about loyalty. About trust. With steady hands, he took the knife and cut his palm. Their blood mingled as they clasped hands, the fire of pain binding them as surely as the gallows would have ended him. "Your word is mine," Chayton said, "and yours is mine," Daniel answered. In that moment, the pact was no longer necessity, it was choice. No longer survival, it was brotherhood. The rope that once promised his death had instead tied his fate to Chayton's, and together, their bond sealed in blood would change everything.